el medio digital que te informa, blockchain y criptos a toda hora. Damos comunidad, información y libertad. Aprende y avanza. En Bolivia el cambio nos reta, del oriente al occidente. Blockchain crece desde el 2020. Un nuevo mundo al alcance, vamos en cada avance, educamos sin fronteras, unidos hacia nuevas eras. Blockchain aprende y avanza, en Bolivia el caos está. Somos red, comunidad, blockchain hacia la libertad y ver. Blockchain, el medio digital que te informa, blockchain y a toda hora desarrollamos comunidad, información y libertad. Blockchain aprende y avanza, en Bolivia el cambio nos reta, somos red, comunidad. Un nuevo mundo al alcance, en cada avance, miramos sin fronteras, hacia nuevas eras.
Para todos los asistentes en este momento que quisieran tener la traducción en línea de inglés a español, para poder entender toda la información que se está compartiendo en inglés, pueden solicitar los audífonos a nuestros encargados de protocolo y así van a poder tener la traducción simultánea de toda la información que se vaya a compartir en ambos idiomas.
I come to the conversation not just as an investor and advisor, but as someone who's spent the past decade working hands-on with the executive teams across digital assets and the financial sectors, helping build partnerships, structure strategic initiatives, and navigate this complex but transformative space. Currently, I advise several leading blockchain and financial organizations, regulate crypto exchanges, the top stablecoin issuers, and global finance and compliance infrastructure providers. My work focuses on aligning innovation with practical regulation, ensuring that blockchain technology isn't just exciting, but it's useful, safe, and scalable. Around the world, financial institutions are no longer asking if they should consider blockchain. They're asking how. We're seeing traditional banks enter the space through custody, solutions, tokenized assets, and blockchain-based settlement layers. This is not about replacing fiat currencies. It's about enhancing transparency, reducing costs, and enabling access globally. Digital assets and stablecoins also offer tremendous potential for payments via real-time, borderless, and low-cost transactions that can benefit individuals, businesses, and e-governments, especially in countries with the large unbanked populations or high remittance flows. But adoption isn't just a technical issue, it's regulatory, it's legal, it's educational. Governments and institutions need clarity and confidence. That's why pilot programs, regulatory sandboxes, and clear digital asset classifications are key tools to move forward responsibly. On the technology side, interoperability is essential. Blockchain should not be viewed as a separate or antagonistic to the traditional financial system. It's an upgrade layer, both from the ISOs or compliant chains to CBDCs. Bridges, the future is one where both systems coexist and complement one another. Security must also be prioritized. Through smart contract audits, regulated custody frameworks, and strong AML and KYC systems, it's not enough to innovate, we must also protect. Ultimately, Bolivia has a chance to leapfrog, not to lag. By focusing on high-impact, low-friction use cases like remittances, digital identity, and public finance transparency, and by inviting collaboration between government, academia, and entrepreneurs, Bolivia can define a uniquely forward-thinking path. I encourage all of us today to engage not just in dialogue, but in co-creation. Because the decisions made here will shape not only Bolivia's financial system, but its place in the global digital economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you, David. Michael, Elise, could you please share your thoughts on this first question? I rephrase, what are the key differences between normal finance and blockchain finance? Again, Bolivia needs to know what's all the hype about.
Elise, I'll let you, if you want to start.
Sure, I'm happy to. Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay, and thank you so much for having me. I'm Elise Susi-Watts. I'm the Executive Director of Global Digital Finance. We're a not-for-profit industry association, and we work very hard to try to bridge the gap between the public sector, governments and regulators, and industry to work towards building more future-proof regulatory frameworks for evolving technologies. And so when we think about the benefits that blockchain and DLT can bring to the financial services ecosystem specifically, I think it's really about not just, what is this one technology and what is any one new product, but instead this is a transformation of the underlying infrastructure for financial services. This is an evolution, much like the introduction of the internet in the early days, and then, the innovation that came with email. This is the potential to transform the overall system. There's a potential for efficiency and automation across the entirety of the trade life cycle. So, for example, to take a couple kind of practicalities, if you think about issuance, for example, digital tokens can simplify syndication and registration. There's also been a lot of analysis that was done on tokenizing investment grade bonds and being able to reduce operating costs by 40 to 60% compared to traditional issuance, for example. And during trading and settlement, you also have a lot of potential for the collateral management and securities financing as well. And, there's been other studies, and I'm happy to share these links after our discussion as well. But around 100 billion in daily repo transactions could realize 150 to 300 million in annual cost savings via tokenized collateral and instantaneous settlement. And so those are obviously, some really quite striking and stark numbers. And I think that this is the point that I'm trying to make, is that when you have a transformation of the underlying infrastructure, you have that potential for efficiency, but also for cost savings and overall delivering benefits for growth as well. And I think then just sort of zooming out to the global context as this infrastructure transformation is occurring around the world, that's the real potential there, because it's not just about any one market, but it's also about the growth strategy to be able to bring new companies in and also then connect with these transforming markets in other countries as well. So I'm sure Michael has some great points to add as well, but hopefully that's helpful as an introductory point.
Thank you very much. Michael, if we can keep going with your answer for this first question, please.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you, Elise. Just a brief introduction of myself. My name is Michael Carr. I'm the founder and CEO of When Crypto Consulting, a professional advisory firm established in 2021 dedicated to the blockchain and digital asset industry. And we provide professional advice for blockchains, tier 1 and tier 2 digital asset exchanges, and traditional finance organizations who are entering into these markets, which aligns to the question that you're asking as to what is the benefits to the blockchain payment system. And without repeating a lot of what Elisa said there in the previous speakers, the main focus I would have and the main benefit is the transparency and various markets and partnerships that blockchain opens up for countries like Bolivia, where putting yourselves on interoperable blockchains will open up various markets where you can increase your trade through tokenization, through the adoption of stable coins to increase the speed of settlement, and also then expand using your natural resources then to trade a lot freer. Obviously, you have efficiency that goes along with that transparency and cost savings as well, which was alleviated to by Elise.
Thank you very much, Michael. I'm really glad that you actually mentioned how we can use blockchain as a tool to administrate and utilize in a better manner the natural resources that Bolivia has currently. I have a second question for the four of you. And I know that Bolivia is new to crypto, but would you help us understanding how mainstream is crypto in other countries and in other financial regulated systems in the world? Maybe.
So as a former banking regulator, was the former regulator for the largest banks in the world, we started looking at principles and how do large financial institutions integrate with cryptocurrencies. So as you start thinking about this from a formative policy point of view, some of the guiding principles to kind of keep in mind are usually you always think of the principle of safety and soundness, because as you adopt these new technologies and frameworks, you want to make sure you have the ability to protect your country's constituents and just building the availability and look at how do you increase the participation. And over, I'd say, the past 4+ years that I've been with crypto, we've seen a lot of countries that initially had prohibition against it, start embracing it and changing every year. The number of countries that have restrictions on has been, I'd say, rapidly decreasing, and more organizations are looking at how do we actually adopt this, as well as at the Federal Reserve as regulator. We looked at it, the construct of digital assets are really here to stay. How they get integrated in the mainstream financial system is going to be an integral part of how you work with your country frameworks and regulators to do that. But this construct is going to be here to stay.
Yeah, just to add what David shared, last year was in Las Vegas, the Bitcoin conference. There was 35,000 people that attended, where over the first Bitcoin conference, I think, was held in the rooftop deck of a very small location in San Francisco. But I still think we're extremely early. If we look at the adoption of the internet back in the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, and we look at where we are in terms of either digital asset adoption and how it's integrated into larger banking systems and financial industries, we're still extremely early. There's so much growth. I think a lot of the long-term winners in the space are yet to be decided, even though there's some really good players in the space already. I would highlight that last year when BlackRock launched the Bitcoin ETF, they expected that they'd do about $5 million in volume in the first year. In the first 11 months, they did over 50 billion. So they did a 10x, and that's the fastest adoption of an ETF in history. BlackRock held the previous version or the previous time frame of getting to 50 billion, and that had taken 4 years. So there's a huge appetite that we're seeing globally, and I think we're just still super early.
Thank you very much. I think can we move on with you, Elise? Could you help us understand, under your experience, how mainstream has crypto assets and technology become in the financial world currently?
Happy to. And thank you. Thank you for that. And I would agree with what's been set out previously. So I won't restate in terms of that adoption. But I think another interesting metric to look at is how the regulation is evolving. And this is an area that we focus on really specifically, which is because of the adoption of crypto and digital assets, so not just cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and Ethereum, but also, for example, stable coins and tokenized products as well, we have seen major increases of regulators bringing these within the regulatory perimeter, in particular for stable coins, but then also in their frameworks for how to, prevent market abuse, make sure there's appropriate disclosures around crypto products, and also the permissibility of certain crypto products for both retail and wholesale consumers. And so I think that this is another really important metric to watch, because if crypto were something that was just going away or was not going to be used widely by financial markets, then there would be no point in regulating it. But instead, we are seeing an increase in regulatory frameworks around the world. In the UAE, we have purpose-built regulators like VARA, as well as the regulation of stablecoins under the ADGM FSRA. In the EU, we have comprehensive regulatory frameworks like MiCA that seek to regulate the whole of the market. Obviously, already mentioned kind of what's happening in the US, but stablecoin legislation progressing there, as well as a number of initiatives that are being progressed in the UK. And of course, not to leave out what's happening in APAC, with numerous frameworks being proposed in places like Taiwan, developments in South Korea, Hong Kong also tightening down their stablecoin regulation. And so again, I would use this as a really practical example of how mainstream these things are becoming when they're able to be used as payment instruments, when they're able to be used more widely for settlement and trading across financial markets. It shows the kind of whole growth of the industry, that this isn't just something that's kind of niche and in a corner, but it's actually being integrated with the fiber of financial markets as a whole. And so that is an interesting kind of adoption metric that I would point to, and one I think should be watched closely.
Thank you very much, Elise. Finally, Michael, you are the head of Crypto, which is a company that actually advises regulators themselves. Can you help us understand how mainstream has crypto became in the world, not only Latin America, but mainly?
Yeah, and for this, I would take a different, I suppose, approach to the other three panelists. When I got into crypto or digital assets, it's been more referred to now to make it more professional. It was traders that were the first adopters of this industry. And what we've seen over time is the evolution of an industry, like most industries, where it's gone from early entrants being crypto traders to large institutions and countries that are adopting this now as a way of, for example, countries of implementing the infrastructure through payments and other items. We've recently seen in Dubai that you can make payments for government fees in crypto. We see in Europe a rollout of a holistic regulation through MiCA, which is there to adopt and grow an industry, which was really not a big player for these large crypto exchanges. But now that financial institutions, on which Europe is a hotbed, are coming into this industry, we have a whole new regulation. We have a very friendly crypto president in the US, which again is looking to adopt it taking it from its early origins of traders, now that large institutions are moving into this industry. And again, I use the word moving, they're already there. They are in this industry now. Most large institutions have a digital asset department or are creating digital asset departments. And what it means for a country like Bolivia to adopt a digital asset regulatory framework will allow you to expand, as I say, into markets. But it also, at the moment, being first out of the gate is not a good thing all the time. Whereas in the case of Bolivia, you can take the best of this adoption that we've seen in various jurisdictions like the Middle East, like Europe, soon to be USA, El Salvador, and take the best of those rules and regulations that have worked and make them to suit your own country to roll out this adoption, where it includes attracting large institutions, but also promotes internal domestic innovation. So whilst you look out to attract large industries to come to the country and you give the relative benefits by using what you have domestically as well and providing those benefits for domestic innovation, you really see the benefit of that adoption and how far, the mainstream adoption of this industry is.
Thank you very much, Michael. And your answer leads me to the next question that I want to ask to David. We need to take advantage of your background, academic and as regulator yourself. So would you share with us if you have experience working with other financial institutions in Latin America? And what was like working with countries likewise Bolivia? What were they looking for?
I think for the formative session where you're thinking about how do you develop policy, I think the first step is in a lot of cases what I would consider a thoughtful policy, looking at how do you develop policy that is going to inspire participation within this network, and how do you make sure that the policy there is also clear so that the personnel that are participating within the environment understand the rules and the licensing. As it was just mentioned by one of our colleagues, the US has changed perspective on that, where they're now more crypto friendly, but there still is a lot of fragmentation in what kind of regulations should be applied. So I think, you're at a crossroads where you come up with clear policy to encourage participation with there, putting the guardrails for what we call safety and soundness of how you protect the citizens and the participants in the network, as well as, looking at the existing, banking regulations and rules that you have and really looking at, does this actually apply to this new digital type of asset? Or do we need to reevaluate how do we apply these rules and regulations that we already have? And then from there, essentially creating almost the regulatory sandbox for the initial members to participate closely with the regulators as these new tools and technologies get stood up, where it's a friendly participation, where you're working closely with the central banks, the regulators, and the technology innovators, to have these sandboxes for the organizations to participate in, and everybody gets a chance to learn before it gets released on a very broad scale.
You want me to add to that? Okay. I think regulators are actually in a tough spot in a lot of countries because, as David said, they're focused on safety and soundness. If they're not, in some ways, we're so early. There's a lot of there may be a lack of knowledge or understanding in certain geographic regions by the regulators. And so the good thing is there's best practices that are coming out of at least mentioned and highlighting a lot of those in our world geographically. At the same time, people are going to speculate this is it's borderless, and so the more that regulators can get up to speed, step in, and put together like not overly burdensome regulatory, but things that work that are going to allow the citizens of their country to be protected, but also take advantage of the real-time, the low cost and the borderless options that are out there. It leads to a good outcome for everyone.
Thank you. I want to mention that at the end of this session, as at the end of every single panel that we're going to hold today, you are going to be able to ask a couple of questions. So if in between the conversation, you happen to have a question that you would like to ask to the panel, please feel free to raise your hand, write it down, and people from protocol would approach you to receive that question. David, with your background in academic, what can you say were some of the brightest options, ideas, and propositions, thinking of innovation, that you have learned from your students and from the study class, that you could share for Bolivia with the knowledge that you have of the situation and economy of the country?
So I would say, the underlying premise is technology always runs faster than regulation. So as new technologies emerge, you need to, set the framework to embrace them, allow new technologies around not only the, tokenization of digital assets, but the unique opportunities that we're seeing develop with smart contracts and micro lending. They're very innovative, very fast solutions. So again, kind of going back to what we talked about with that innovation sandbox of looking at how do you kind of construct that safe area for these innovators to work, where they have the experience and exposure to the, the banking regulators, as well as look at the new technologies that are coming. Because again, with crypto, with blockchain, that means adopting cloud services at scale, and means leveraging microservices as well. So it brings technology transformation to the entire organization. So how you prepare for that is very important. And by having those groups that can share and learn from each other and work together, you create that model where it can fail fast and without it becoming a larger issue where it affects, broader society. And this way you learn, you make mistakes, you adopt, you look at how the technology can be essentially fine-tuned to work better within the framework. At least that's how we try and do it at Harvard, as well as a former regulator working closely with the innovators to see, what is coming down the road and how do we learn from that innovation that's there, and will it fit within our existing framework, or do we need to start thinking differently about these things?
So one story to share, you're asking about how the youth of today can help. I'm sure there are either young kids in either high school or in university here in Bolivia that are already pretty far ahead of most of us in this room around the space. There are two students when they're at the University of Georgia, Chris and Justin, that had a business plan contest they entered, and they wanted to become one of the largest money transmitters in Africa that was a low-cost provider to compete against Western Union and others that they felt were taking advantage of the market. They won their best business contest that they entered, and I helped advise them. They're now one of the largest money transmitters in Africa. They do billions of yearly volume. They've been invested in by PayPal, other large strategic investors around the world. And so I think the advantage that the youth has today is they don't have the baggage of the traditional history of the financial system that a lot of us bring. And so they're able to look at it in a different way without having that, the kind of holding them back.
Yeah, that's a great point. The earlier you can expose students to these types of technologies, the more innovation and more opportunity will be created.
Thank you. Now that we understand that, and its potential, Elise, I would like to ask you a question to you. Given your work at the GDF, how important is global regulatory alignment for a country? Concerning specifically to blockchain adoption? And where is the international conversation heading towards?
Thanks. Thank you so much for the question. And this is a topic that I certainly feel very strongly and passionately about. And I think that we need to move away from talking about harmonization and interoperability in the general sense, and instead focus on specific areas where we can achieve functional equivalence. So if you think about traditional financial services markets, there are many products that run on a cross-border basis. And when we think about digital markets, some of the most powerful use cases are those cross-border use cases and the ability to have that global connectivity. And so taking stable coins in particular, for example, if we don't have that functional equivalence on reserve management, very practical issues like disclosures, where do they need to be located? What language do they need to be in? How can we make sure that there are bilateral agreements in place between the two regulators of the country where that stable coin operates? We will then lose a lot of that functionality and lose some of the global scalability and the potential of these new technologies. And so when I think about global regulatory alignment, it's absolutely foundational, but it's also something that I think countries have an opportunity to build in at the outset as they're building their frameworks now. There's only a few frameworks around the world, like MiCA in the EU, where they have it pretty comprehensively locked in. Many others, even the US, while having a friendly tone, are still building the frameworks that they need. And indeed, actually, Genius actually had provisions in it for reciprocity. And so I think that there's potential here as other frameworks start to emerge as well to look, as I think one of my fellow panelists mentioned earlier, where things have worked well, where they didn't, and then speak to industry about the areas where crucial alignment is needed. And so that things don't break down on an operation perspective and we can align on a global level. As to where the conversations are occurring, they are, of course, occurring in the global standard setters too. So IOSCO, FATF, FSB, Basel Committee, these are all areas where regulators are also working together to try to achieve harmonization and are equally critical. But I think it's important to remember that, IOSCO, for example, sets out global principles. These are not the practicalities. And you do need to have both. The principles help to create frameworks that are already aligned, but then you need that functionality as well. And so I'm really excited about where we can take that in the future, but it is certainly going to require a lot of public and private sector cooperation to get there. And I think this is an area where industry needs to continue to feed back to regulators on those specifics where functional equivalence should be.
From all of the people that you've worked with, what are some of the common misconceptions regulators have about the stablecoins, especially when developing policy?
So I think that, fundamentally, it's important here, and I say that as a former regulator myself. I used to be a regulator in the UK at the FCA. And it's important to think about what the objectives are for regulators. So they are there to make sure we have safe, fair, and orderly markets. A lot of times their primary objectives are the ones aligned around consumer protection, or in the case of, financial stability regulators like the Bank of England, for example, financial stability. So protecting consumers, ensuring financial stability. And there will be secondary objectives like innovation and growth as well, but oftentimes those are not always the primary objectives. And so I think when it comes to misconceptions around things like stablecoins, the concerns are usually around making sure there's adequate reserve management, making sure there's transparency, the interoperability, things like, is it really one-to-one backed? And there was a lot of, I think, confusion in some of the early days of stablecoins as well, things claiming to be a stablecoin, which maybe were not necessarily. And I think, breakdown of certain algorithmic stablecoins we saw as well also did not help that narrative. And so I think now that stablecoins are becoming more and more mainstream, it's really important for industry to be be specific when we're speaking to regulators about these different products and instruments that are being developed. But I also think that it's important for regulators to also take the time to then speak to industry about what the actual products are. And again, this is an area where I think that global harmonization can really help as we start to sort of coalesce around what good reserve management looks like. What does good disclosure policy look like? What does an appropriate redemption window look like as well? And also, where are the use cases both in wholesale and retail markets? And I think it's important to acknowledge that that doesn't look the same everywhere, that there may be different use cases for stable coins in different parts of the world, and that's okay. And so it's also up to regulators to evaluate what the needs are of their particular jurisdiction.
Thank you very much, Elise. And please, maybe Justin, Michael, if you would like to jump on this question, I would be really thankful, because as a country, we have been approaching the blockchain and crypto adoption conversation, specifically thinking and focused on the stable coins. So, Michael, could you help us with your insights?
Yeah, and I suppose to give a bit of insight, I'll touch on a couple of points that were made by a couple of the panelists, and just some terms that was used that, for example, technology moves faster than regulation. But also businesses adapt a lot quicker than what regulators may also be comfortable with. So I'll give you an example of that. We're working with a firm at the moment who are establishing themselves in the Middle East and the UAE. And they want to use stable coins as part of their reserves. So to be able to show the regulator that they're completely proof of reserves, that they are over collateralized. Of course, the question comes in then as to where is the stable coin being backed and in what regulation, under which regulator is actually managing the reserve of one-to-one. So it's not just, I suppose, on this that we see the use of stable coins for quicker payments to help the unbanked, to open up new markets. But we also see businesses then adopting stablecoin in a way to help them, I suppose, use it on a day-to-day business as usual for their business, but by making it cross-jurisdictional. So where you could have two regulators managing the proof of reserve of a firm using stablecoins. We, as a business, are working with numerous stablecoin issuers in Europe, especially for adoption, and it's coming along with the faster payments. That seems to be the area. But where I would see the benefits for Bolivia, outside of the faster payments, is to increase adoption, you need usability. So stable coins, if we look at El Salvador, where people adopted Bitcoin, adopted wallets, if you adopt, it will be adopted domestically. It won't be adopted through large institutions. That won't filter down to the day-to-day usability of it. They will use it. They are already using it, but it's domestically, and it's with the citizens where you want to see the use of stable coins. Quicker payments coming from outside Bolivia into Bolivia for people that are living abroad, and then quicker settlement for people purchasing goods and services within the country. And that's where I see the focus on stable coins for Bolivia on the initial small wins and quick wins.
We're pretty comfortable with CBDCs and stable coins, with the exception of the algorithmic ones. Just the consideration for the CBDCs, though, is you have to really look at how to do the integration and adoption within the overall banking system to encourage the banks to really accept and process those types of things. But I think it's been a big shift where we're a lot more comfortable with those constructs now.
Yeah, CBDC is central bank digital currency, just anybody's wondering on that. I think Michael touched on a lot of the points that I would have added. The payment and the integration in the country to get it to scale is really important. Tristan and the team in El Salvador did a really fascinating job in getting the usage and adoption by rolling out wallets. So that's also a potential for Bolivia, as well as the rate of change of having it be low cost. And just coming back to that on the payment side, I think it's going to be one of the biggest advantages of bringing the stable coins and giving regulation. We're also seeing in different countries that if it's backed one-to-one, they'd rather be backed one-to-one in their country versus being back to number one in the US.
Thank you. Thank you all. Michael, I have a question for you. Take a country like Bolivia, in the heart of South America, with a blank canvas about regulation for crypto assets, blockchain, innovation, digital innovation. If you could create a digital asset framework, what practical steps should a country take in the first, let's say, 12 to 24 months, the first couple of years, if they want to seriously create a digital asset infrastructure? What would you recommend that the country starts on?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I suppose the natural answer is regulation. And it is, but there are two parts to that. And the most important thing for a country like Bolivia is to not have death of economic growth by regulation of digital assets. There's a wonderful opportunity here in Bolivia to, essentially drive on parts of the economy through digital asset adoption. So if I was starting a project like this, I would have obviously a very multi-jurisdictional regulatory framework, but also that would be linked to the business and economic growth and benefits that it would bring to the country. So if Bolivia is to adopt a digital asset regulatory framework, the reason you're doing this is to enhance economic growth. And from a regulatory point of view, Bolivia is lucky because you can take policies, as I said earlier, from all these other jurisdictions and take the best bits, but also you can look at where those areas of economic growth in digital assets have come from and start to attract in firms from outside Bolivia into Bolivia, but also start to really drive innovation internally. So that would be the approach I would take in the first 12 to 24 months, would be have your experts in regulation, but also have your regulatory sandboxes there that promotes innovation internally. And then outside of that, have your business development and your government development teams that are attracting in firms now, not waiting till the regulation has passed, working with them to come to Bolivia and drive that economy as well, and drive that expertise. And that's where I would take the approach.
Thank you very much, Michael. And Elise, David, Justin, would you like to add?
Maybe just
to this first step that a blank canvas country of Bolivia should take, especially at the beginning, when you still have nothing officially, so in terms of regulation.
So I think the importance from learning from others was an excellent point. And earlier, I believe it was something called like Tech UK, when early cloud adoption came out, was where that innovation sandboxes really got set up. And there were regular environments for not only the innovators to participate in that sandbox, but also for the regulators to be there to learn how this new technology is working, see how these things get applied. And so I think, there's a lot of benefit and power in setting up those innovation sandboxes. It encourages, the technology innovators. It gives you an open dialogue between regulators, the central bankers, and traditional bankers to all participate in this community, and everyone can really learn from each other. So in addition to taking essentially the best of what's out there from other regulations, it really gives you a look at how to encourage technology that is going to work in a manner that's going to support, the goals for Bolivia.
Yeah, I just add a little bit to what Mike and Dave were saying. I mean, I think when you got somebody like Tristan that's come in for the last year, lived in the country, is passionate about it, it's been tied to the country for a long time. Even doing things like today, this entire event, I was just in Thailand earlier this year, and it was all about educating on the travel rule, which is a very specific part of just how exchanges do KYC and AML between each other to make sure everything's aligned. There is an opportunity now. There is so much going on around the world, and you can source the best and brightest. So in a way, Bolivia, what I said in my opening remarks, the ability to leapfrog you don't have to make the same mistakes that other countries have made. And so there's the ability to really utilize that in a good way. Both things that Michael and Lisa have said and the work that they're doing can be really relevant here in Bolivia as well.
Thank you very much, Justin. Elise, would you like to add something else?
Thanks. Just maybe one last addition for me, though I do think that the panel has covered it very well. I was just going to add on to what Michael said about how to kind of attract and bring in firms into the country. And I think that's a really important point. I think that, one could really look at, for example, what happened in the Middle East to try to bring in new firms there. Even before regulatory frameworks were set, they were proactively going out, meeting with firms, saying, how can we clarify things for you? Talk about what's already permitted, what's likely coming down the pipeline. And also, I think there's really something to be said too for creating an environment where firms and startups, fintechs, crypto and blockchain companies can then also meet with VCs and other interested capital in the region too. I think that connection point is also going to be really critical towards driving forward investment. So that was just another addition that I wanted to add in, but I think very excellent points made by my fellow panelists.
Thank you, Liz. We have some questions from the audience. The first one that I received is a question about market making prices, and we're actually gonna go deeper into the matter on one of the panels this afternoon. So I'm gonna save this question for that panel because we're actually gonna have also someone from finance sharing their legal experience with regulation about the subject. And I think this question is perfect for that panel. One last question from me for the four of you, while we receive the rest of the questions from the audience. What is the main lesson that the finance world could actually learn about embracing crypto? Because one thing is to talk about a country and a society adopting and building infrastructure, but I would like to have your insights on how could the finance institution learn the path that it has been already walked through, and we're new, but that we wanna hear your thoughts on it.
So I think one of the great learning areas right now that we're seeing is tokenization of traditional assets, whether it's commodities or whether it's mortgages or other financial instruments. We're seeing large financial institutions actively exploring that space of how do they take that? The other things that we're actually looking at, or at least as a former regulator, looking at, in times of crises, how does blockchain potentially help, build transparency into what's going on? I've done, I guess, 3 appointments as a regulator. The first time I was a regulator was during the housing crisis way back in 2008, and there was trillions of dollars that were required for conducting that bailout. And when the Fed had to open that lending window, the degree of precision of how much money was needed to support all the financial institutions was very hard to actually calculate. So had things been on a blockchain, you've been able to actually look at it and be like, okay, here's your total lendable assets that we can actually support, and here's how much we can give you. And plus, we would probably have a much better picture into, was it really $3 trillion that was needed for the bailout, or was that right number maybe 1.8? So we're looking at it as ways of how do you enhance, from a blockchain point of view, how do you use that technology to increase and enhance the resiliency of traditional banking, as well as explore the new tokenization of traditional finance instruments.
Thanks, David. I actually think the financial incumbents that adopt faster than slower are going to win big time. Even Bank Social, that's one of the sponsors here, and John will speak later on the panels. They're doing what they can to innovate, not replace the existing financial system, but how do you have interoperability between the two? So Swift's not going away. Other things that we rely on in traditional finance are going away, but there are ways to bridge to make it faster and better, and the more compliant. The programmability of the layers that enable the bridges are going to be really important to us. So it speaks to what you're saying as well, David.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you, David. Elise, Michael, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I think I would add on to that last point and agree that, in defense of banks, I think, and the existing financial services sector, a lot of them have been innovating how they can, but they are also under a large amount of regulation currently. And so they can't always just transform quickly at the drop of a hat. However, they have been exploring these technologies for years and implementing where they can, where it makes sense, and where they can practically. And I think as regulation continues to evolve, they will certainly continue to innovate. I think that I would personally divide the financial services sector into two kind of camps, which is there are the banks and the large financial institutions that have been watching this evolution really carefully, and they've already been building internally, collecting the right teams, collecting the right people, and getting ready to transform. And there are those that have kind of been watching that happen a bit more cautiously and waiting to see. I think that the lesson probably to be learned for those who are waiting for the kind of sweeping changes in regulatory environments. I mean, given the kind of unfriendly posture the US used to have, for example, this was a concern for big US banks. I think for those that were waiting to see, they'll now need to make some really smart mergers, acquisitions, that sort of thing, looking at what companies they can maybe acquire so that they can scale more quickly when these transformations occur. So I do think there's some lessons to be learned here, but I think that to my view, the end state is not a complete destruction at all of the old financial services system. This is instead an evolution, and we'll have new kind of challengers who are going to step up and take new roles in the ecosystem, but we will also have some really innovative banks and institutions that will step forward as well.
Thank you, Elise. Michael, is there something else you would like to add to this last question?
Yes, and again, all great points made by each members of the panel, especially around innovation and possibly the restrictions within the traditional finance firms of innovation, which kind of touches on a point I made earlier on debt by regulation at times, and that applies to innovation as well. However, one thing traditional firms, banking firms, should realize from this new technology is that the unbanked do have a way now to access money. They have a way to have a bank account, and they have a way to enter into markets, we say from a I suppose a simpler point of view or a simpler perspective. But what that also means as well is that from traditional finance firms, that new markets are opening for the innovators who create these products. And that's something that I think that they probably are, themselves investing in. They probably are looking at, like Elisa said there, they're looking to merger and acquire these startup firms or well-established firms that have entered these markets. Because, yeah, I think going forward, what we're going to see is that less people unbanked entering into this market of having a bank account, and then creating with that opportunity new products and new innovations.
Thank you, Michael. We have a question here for any of the board of you, please. From Juan Pablo Sanchez. He's asking, given that virtual assets in Bolivia have been considered an alternative to an actual solution on the financial crisis that we're going through as a country, how do you think regulation should be approached? Understanding that we're dealing with a possible solution to a problem that we're facing.
I can take a small, apologies, please, David, you go.
All right, I thought, Michael, did you want to go first?
No, please go first.
Okay. I don't know that I don't think that it would be wise for any of us to pretend to have the answer to that question. But one thing I would add is looking at what's been done in South Korea. the adoption, they've been pretty much a leader from early on in terms of the regulation that they've placed over digital assets in the country. They have very deep adoption within the country, so much that more of the population in South Korea is active in digital assets than they are in the stock market. And so it's become a very productive way of people, getting and gaining value and adopting it that way. So there is a path forward here for Bolivia around the digital assets. It's going to be a very positive have very positive impact for the country. I'll let my esteemed colleagues here on the panel figure out how we actually do that.
Yeah, I don't have the answer to that either. But I suppose what I was going to add is that the one thing with virtual assets is it's a dynamic, fast industry. It's not like your traditional banking industry 9 to 5. It's 24/7, 365 days a week. So when you're presented with a solution for Bolivia, you must act within the speed of this industry as well. So you can't take a step back and wait 12 months to 18 months to come back, revise this panel review and take the recommendations on that. You have to move swift in the industry. The technology is there to support those solutions and those outcomes that you're looking to get. And you have many experts now, not just on the various panels today, but worldwide that can support you in coming to those solutions and rolling them out.
Much. We still have some.
Just to flag, we're not able to hear the
En este panel, por el tema de tiempo, casi todos los oradores tienen que presentar virtualmente para unirnos en el Zoom. Y era una excelente pregunta al final del panel anterior sobre cómo podemos empezar con la regulación de activos virtuales. Yo personalmente, en el año que estoy aquí, veo el crecimiento enfocado en el uso y facilitación de los stablecoins.
Después,
Específicamente, para acceder a liquidez de dólares y para acceder a las herramientas financieras en otros países, incluso en Bolivia. El uso de los stablecoins y la regulación de los stablecoins es bastante importante porque esta es una herramienta que está usada en todo el mundo hoy mismo. Casi todos los países en el mundo igual están desarrollando al menos algún tipo de desarrollo en los CBDCs, monedas digitales del Banco Centrales. Y en este panel vamos a discutir, tenemos panelistas increíbles Tenemos Anthony Apalo, que es el director ejecutivo de Wyoming Stablecoin Commission de Estados Unidos. Tenemos Ilan Meléndez, que es el líder del ecosistema Web3 de BitLab y Blockchain. Tenemos Jonas Gross, que es el fundador y presidente del Digital Euro Association. Y Sergio Covelada, director jurídico de Wenia, que es el producto cripto en Colombia. Entonces tenemos una oportunidad de aprender sus pensamientos, sus perspectivas en cómo nos vemos en relación y en seguridad y el uso de los stablecoins y CBDCs. I think we should start with an introduction. If each of the panelists can take a minute or two to give an introduction on yourself and your projects.
Aló. Hola, ¿me escuchan? Creo que está en mute del salón, entonces creo que no los escucho. Pero voy a empezar yo tal vez con la introducción. Un gusto saludarlos a todos. Muchísimas gracias por la invitación de ser parte de este panel. Gracias a mis compañeros panelistas. Voy a decirlo en español, espero que no sea más problema, pero como la mayoría estamos en lengua española, pues entonces se me hace más sencillo. Mi nombre es Ilan Meléndez, yo soy líder regional de la iniciativa Blockchain, el cual es una iniciativa que nace en el 2019 por el Banco Interamericano de Desarrollo, específicamente el Laboratorio de Innovación, para habilitar un ecosistema de blockchain que le permita a los países poder aprovechar estas tecnologías en compliance con la regulación. Al día de hoy, blockchain es una de las redes de este tipo, llamamos público permisionada, o redes tipo corporativas, en las cuales tienen mayor cantidad de casos de uso en el mundo. Estamos hablando de más de 150 casos de uso desplegados sobre la red, impactando al día de hoy más de 10 millones de personas en Latinoamérica y el Caribe. Y es una iniciativa en que recientemente, junto con algunas agencias de las Naciones Unidas, como IFAD, estamos impulsando casos de uso enfocados en la tokenización de activos digitales para sistemas agroindustrial. Y también estamos lanzando una iniciativa que quiero presentar ahora más adelante, relacionada con la tokenización de dinero emitido por los bancos centrales. Y Tristan, te devuelvo la palabra. Gracias.
Thank you very much. Sergio.
Hola, Sergio Covaleda. Soy el Chief Legal Officer de Wenia. Wenia es una compañía de activos digitales que opera desde las Bermudas y que hace parte del grupo CIBES, anteriormente Grupo Bancolombia. Nosotros ofrecemos una plataforma tecnológica que permite en este momento vincular a los colombianos para que puedan comprar, vender, intercambiar, enviar o recibir activos digitales de forma segura, regulada y bajo un modelo robusto en la gestión de riesgos y AML.
Thank you. Jonas?
Yes, I hope you can understand me well.
Yes.
Yeah. Perfect. So yeah, thank you very much for the invitation. My name is Jonas Groß. I'm currently co-founder and chairman of the Digital Euro Association, which is a think tank around CBDCs and stablecoins, where we help central banks globally to design their basically national currency strategies, be it around central bank digital currencies or be it around stablecoins. We are very deep into all these developments, and basically, of course, also very close to the European Central Bank and other central banks here out of Europe that are working on this Besides that, I'm also the Chief Operating Officer at Tonic, which is a small consultancy company here based out of Germany, where I dial in from, where we advise also governments, central banks, and private sector companies on their strategy. And when it comes to payments, identity, and digital money, of course, CBDCs and stablecoins are a very important part of this. And just to conclude, from my side, my initial background is in economics. So I originally took a PhD in around CBDCs, which was quite exciting because it was a novel topic. I could do a lot of research and then kind of went very deep into practice, and then also advising central banks and others, and not just being stuck, let's say, in theory, but uniting both theory and practice. And I'm really looking forward to this panel, and thank everybody for being here, and thanks again for the invitation.
Thank you. And Anthony.
Good morning. My name is Anthony Apollo. I currently serve as the Executive Director of the Wyoming Stable Token Commission. I've been in this role for just under 2 years. And what we're doing in Wyoming is creating the first fiat-backed and fully reserved stable token or stable coin issued by a public entity in the United States. We're in an interesting spot because as a state, we have a sovereign ability to issue our own stablecoin, but we certainly keep tabs on what the federal government of the United States is doing, as well as the frameworks being proposed and put forth abroad. We are looking to launch in the coming months. And I will also specify that the program that we are developing here with the Wyoming Stable Token is a public good. The intent is to back the Wyoming Stable Token with cash and U.S. Treasuries, which will bear interest. That interest will come back to the state and fund our school foundation program. So in a way, that is a public good in the state. Before I was in this role, I split my career. The first half was working for some of the large banks in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis to help support the regulatory reporting initiatives put forth by the Dodd-Frank Act. And then the second half of my career was spent in digital assets with a focus around tokenized intellectual property, real-time payments to content creators, royalties paid via smart contracts, as well as digitized securities. I want to thank everyone with the Legislative Assembly for having us here this morning, my fellow panelists, and Tristan as well.
Thank you so much. Anthony, I want to keep you on for a moment and start with a couple questions for you. You're working with the Wyoming Stablecoin Commission, and you're making your own stablecoin. Here in Bolivia, there is a lot of activity and a lot of proposal for stablecoins, but I think there's still a lot to learn about stablecoins. Maybe you can give some insight in a high-level explanation of a stablecoin, for example, USDT or USDC, and the stablecoin that you're looking at in the United States.
Thank you, Tristan. So the best way to think about stablecoins is to focus on what we refer to as fiat-backed stablecoins, where you have a token on a blockchain that's backed by $1 or some kind of fiat equivalent. We also have seen a small number of euro-backed stable tokens as well. The goal is to back these with a combination of cash and short duration debt instruments that will be interest bearing. So these programs can generate some type of funding, whether for a private company like Circle, which issues the USDC stablecoin, or Tether, which issues the USDT stablecoin. When the backing is applied to these tokens, they are functionally fully reserved. That stands in pretty stark contrast to the banking system we have in the US, which is fractionally reserved. So your money is lent out. With stable coins, you can have confidence your dollars are where you expect them to be, or again, other fiat currency. There's many advantages to stable coins. The few that I typically point to are 24/7 availability. As you heard on the last panel, this is a 365, 24/7 industry, and those payments can be done at any time. There's also an ability to do global settlement immediately. So I can send some USDC to Tristan in Bolivia from the state of Wyoming. He can receive it in a few seconds. The fees will be quite minor. And there's minimal counterparty risk because we're going peer-to-peer. My digital wallet can send a stable token or stable coin to Tristan's digital wallet. And that's quite empowering when we talk about the ability to perform global remittances and send funding we could call them digital dollars. We can call them a couple different names for them, but to be able to send something of value across the world in seconds with a lot of efficiency is a very powerful place to be. And that is why, one of the reasons why Wyoming has taken on this endeavor as well. But more broadly than what we're doing in the state, in the US, we do have Circle and USDC as the second largest stablecoin issuer. They are looking to expand across many parts of the world and fit into the different jurisdictions that all have their different frameworks. So Circle has their US operations, but also has a license in the EU to comply with the market and crypto asset regulation framework. They're actually based out of France, and they're working with SBI in Japan. So point being, there's a global perspective here for those types of payments. And then coming back to the US regulatory framework, uncharacteristically, the US is somewhat lacking in its legislation and regulation around digital assets broadly, including stablecoins. Right now, we have the Stable Act in the House of the US, as well as the Genius Act in the Senate of the US, which are both intended to regulate stablecoins. I'm sure we'll talk more about the substance of those in a few moments. But the goal is to put those bills forth quite quickly to create a very clear path around stablecoin issuance in the US. And the expectation is that will be followed with a more broad market structure bill. And as a matter of fact, the first version of a market structure bill called the Clarity Act was released by the House of Representatives in the US on Thursday of last week.
Thank you. Thank you, Anthony. I want to stay on stablecoins for a moment longer and switch to Ilan. In your work, switch to Sergio. Sergio, working with Wenia, they made their own stablecoin. Sergio, I understand that Wenia has a stablecoin of the Colombian peso. Can you tell me a little bit about the reason behind why and how Wenia did that?
Claro que sí, Tristan. En Wenia nosotros creamos el COPW. El COPW es un token que es emitido bajo la guía de proveedores de activos digitales para stablecoin del BMA. La razón de ser del token es porque queremos facilitar a los usuarios, o sea, entendemos que puede haber una barrera tecnológica y que va atado de pronto a una pregunta que hacían anteriormente sobre la volatilidad de los activos digitales. A través del COPW, una persona que no es experta puede comprar este token, el cual le va a permitir convertir o intercambiar con los diferentes tokens nativos de las redes, como son Bitcoin, Ethereum, Sol de Solana, en tiempo real y a través de la misma tecnología, ofreciendo una experiencia más comprensible para el usuario, dado que está referenciado a pesos colombianos. En este sentido, la función literal es ser la puerta de entrada de los usuarios a este mundo digital. Wenia se declara como un puente entre los activos digitales y el mundo tradicional y entendemos que el COPW es la forma para cruzar ese puente. ¿Y por qué por qué estamos tan seguros de ofrecer esta solución? Un poco es el tema de la regulación, es decir, para nosotros crear este COPW previamente tenemos que tener unas reservas, las cuales son custodiadas por una fiduciaria, que son expertos en este tema de custodia y que son entidades licenciadas. Además, estas reservas pues, son auditadas por una compañía que se llama Harris and Trotter, que queda en UK, que tiene mucha relevancia en este entorno de los activos digitales. Entonces, las personas que van a interactuar con este tipo de tokens, pues uno, tienen la tranquilidad de que está referenciado uno a uno con su moneda local para poder hacer los intercambios, y dos, que la compañía que lo está emitiendo lo hace bajo un marco regulatorio robusto y que tiene una liquidez la cual es auditada y representada en la blockchain a través de un oráculo que es Chainlink y que se puede ver en tiempo real cuántas reservas hay y cuántos tokens hay emitidos de COPW.
That we've a little bit of focus on stable coins. Let's understand the context of the central bank digital currency. Jonas and Elon, you do a lot of work with CBDCs in architecture, in regulation, in implementation. Elon, if we can start with you, a lot of your focus is in Latin America. And you work with IDB, with Blockchain, so you've seen the market all over Latin. What are some surprising things that you have seen in different countries looking at central bank digital currencies?
Ujú. Actualmente hay un apetito muy grande por aprender cuáles son las funcionalidades y los beneficios que CBDCs, o como le estamos llamando recientemente, monedas o dinero tokenizado por los bancos centrales, le brindan a los países. La promesa en el enfoque de mayorista de tener CBDCs es incrementar la eficiencia en el sistema financiero, abaratar los costos en la emisión de bonos, títulos emitidos, ¿no? Bonos del tesoro o algún título de valor, y que ese proceso de abaratarlo lo haga también más democrático. Le permita entonces a las personas poder tener accesos a mayor servicios que puedan ser financieros y demás, y tener colocaciones de deuda que puedan ser más accesibles, perdón, para el sistema, para el sector público, para el sector privado, startups y demás. Entonces, creo que eso es un gran beneficio que me parece que ahorita los bancos centrales empiezan a identificar, de que hay un beneficio. Hay otro concepto también muy interesante, que es cómo darle una mayor transparencia, no solo al gasto público interno, sino también al gasto público que se da en forma de subsidios. Y actualmente sucede que muchos países tienen sistemas de subsidios en donde el control que tienen que implementar representa o es más caro que el propio subsidio o el beneficio que las personas están recibiendo, ¿verdad? Y eso es una limitante que muchas veces se da por temas de ley. Y la ley crea un subsidio y la implementación de ese subsidio muchas veces es más caro o es más costoso de lo que se contempla. Utilizar dinero de este tipo permite que la programabilidad de las, de las, de las transacciones o de los tokens puedan ser más fáciles y prácticamente en tiempo real de controlar, abaratando ese control porque es un control que ya está implícito, y además siendo más efectivos entonces en la colocación de esos recursos para las personas que necesitan o para los beneficiarios de esos recursos que son asignados a los subsidios. Eso es una gran ventaja. Nosotros actualmente estamos junto con SEMLA, que es un área para toda Latinoamérica de estudios económicos, y FLAR, que es básicamente un fondo latinoamericano de reservas, coliderando una iniciativa que se llama CB Web3 y que permite a los bancos centrales pasar de la teoría a la práctica. Y me refiero a pasar de la teoría a la práctica, es empezar a hacer pruebas de casos de uso en ambiente seguro, lo que nosotros llamamos sandbox o areneras, para que los bancos centrales puedan interoperar en la emisión de títulos financieros, emisión de monedas digitales, compras de monedas digitales o hacer transacciones de monedas digitales en funciones de pares, ¿verdad? Y también lo que puedan ver ejercicios de interoperabilidad. Y hablo de interoperabilidad porque ya vemos que en la región no somos ajenos al caso de Brasil, que tiene DREX, que ha sido un proceso que ha tenido sus muchos aprendizajes, pero que probablemente el día de mañana cada país va a tener su propia infraestructura para monedas digitales. Y ya lo vemos también en otras regiones del mundo, como en Asia, como en Medio Oriente, en Europa, donde este concepto de monedas digitales empieza a tener más valor. Entonces, eso tal vez es uno de las mayores promesas y lo que consideramos que puede ser de mayor beneficio también para los bancos centrales. Ujú.
Thank you. Thank you, Ilan. Continuing on central bank digital currencies, Jonas, in working with the European Central Bank, that's a large institution, and looking at the central bank digital currency for 500 million people. I'm sure you've come across a lot of different questions. When you're looking at the structure of the token or of the currency, does it look like it's going to be given to all of the banks, or is it only in the ownership of the central bank? Or can you give a little bit of insight in that?
Yes, thank you for the question, Tristan. So I remember when, there were the first days of CBDC, like maybe 6-7 years ago, some research, were a lot of people, claiming like, oh, nice. I mean, you don't need any more banks if you have a CBDC, right? So it's way more efficient if central banks take this over. And of course, you have the other side that says, that's not a world in which we want to end up, because we had this before, that needs private-public partnerships, right? So luckily, the discussions have emerged substantially over the past few years, which clearly shows also here there is a private-public partnership that is to be set up around kind of any CBDC, and also, of course, in the European context for the digital euro. So to be a little bit more precise here, we do know that a CBDC by definition is central bank money, right? So this means it's a liability of the central bank. So this means that whenever a bank is kind of in between and supporting on some ends, it's always doing this on behalf of the central bank, right? It's also not in the balance sheet of a bank, because again, it's a central bank money. So what this means, and why I'm saying this, is in Europe, the European Central Bank does not want to take over the end user contract, let's say. Right? So similar as with cash today, it's not the central bank that directly hands over the cash bills to the end user, but it's done via ATMs or via bank offices. And exactly the same is to be envisioned for the digital euro. So this means that there will be a system established, and again, there hasn't been a decision taken if the digital euro will come. That's very, very important, of course. And what is clear here is that banks will take over a lot of roles in the system. So they will provide the kind of gateway to the end users. So they will distribute, for example, CBDC wallets. They can, they are responsible for the funding. So how has a customer money to spend in CBDC, right? So that's all where banks are involved. What to do if something is going wrong when it comes to about disputes, for example, right? That's again where banks are involved. So long story short, there is a role for both sides, but the European approach is very clear to give a lot of responsibilities to banks, also that banks can develop novel business models out of that there are financial incentives here. But as always, it's a partnership, and it's central bank money, and the settlement is done in central bank money. Of course, the central bank also has an important role to play, and is also ultimately responsible for the infrastructure of the whole system, of the back end, if you will.
Good. Thank you for that. Next question is for both Sergio and Anthony on the stablecoin side, because in Bolivia, the focus today is stablecoins. The need today is stablecoins. Do you see a problem of creating regulation or creating technical systems with stablecoins that will interact in the future with central bank digital currencies?
So I'm happy to take that question first. I do not believe there'll be a large-scale issue around interoperability between privately issued stablecoins and central bank digital currencies, although I will say that it certainly depends on how those CBDCs are created and rolled out. If there is a differentiation between the backing of a stablecoin, let's say USDC from Circle, which has what we call in the US a 2A7 fund around it. Again, it's a very specific blend of cash and treasuries with certain weighted average life and weighted average maturity considerations. If that is a fully preserved instrument and central bank digital currencies do not have some kind of backing to them, I could see how that can create some issues. If central bank digital currencies are considered a fiat analog and are backed as such, I think there's less concern there. I do think that we need to be proactive in thinking about technical interoperability as well. For example, many of the CBDCs that have been proposed on private blockchains where the government or the central bank would have the ability to control what happens on that chain. With what we're doing in Wyoming as a counterpoint, we are looking to launch the Wyoming stable token on public and permissionless blockchains. Now, of course, we'll have controls for onboarding and utilization. We'll have analytics and monitoring to make sure there is no malicious use, but we do expect to be on public infrastructure. If that is something that does not correspond well with privately issued stable coins or privately issued CBDCs on a private chain, that can cause some technical incompatibility. Just as one more note that I would note quickly, one of the things we are looking to accomplish with the Wyoming stable token is to have interoperability between several different public blockchains from our initial deployment. We actually have a mandate from our state legislature to be multi-chain. That would put us closer along to, again, Circle and Tether and other companies that are on many, many chains. And we already have a Wyoming stable token on several blockchain testnets. We're actually on 7 of them already. So I do think that there needs to be a lot of consideration around the technical interoperability, as well as the actual backing of the tokens to make sure you're not creating a liquidity crisis by perhaps transitioning a token that is backed by fiat and cash and treasuries to a token that may be issued by a central bank if it is not formally backed by an asset. I'll turn it over to Sergio.
Gracias, Anthony. Tristan, un poco lo que nosotros vemos es que nosotros lo que vemos es que lo primero que hay que hacer es la naturaleza jurídica de las operaciones. ¿En qué sentido? Hoy el COPW no es dinero fiduciario ni es dinero reconocido como tal dentro del ecosistema o dentro de la regulación local. Los stablecoins son bienes intangibles cuyo precio es 1 a 1 frente a una moneda fiduciaria, pero siguen siendo bienes y no dinero. En este sentido, para poder hacer el settlement entre un CBDC, se requiere un marco jurídico donde se le reconozca esta categoría jurídica de dinero para que se pueda hacer el settlement. Nosotros, ¿qué vemos un poco? Es que entendemos que hay un problema que se puede solucionar a través de stablecoins, y eso es la posibilidad de acceder más rápido, en tiempo real y 24/7, a tipos de activos que finalmente pueden cumplir la función que tiene el dinero dentro del ecosistema. Y nosotros lo vemos más desde el punto de vista del retail. Creemos que de pronto un CBDC hay diferentes aproximaciones. Tenemos la aproximación americana, que es no, dejemos desarrollar esto a los privados, y hay una, como ahorita lo veía con Jonas, hay una aproximación más europea de vamos a desarrollar un CBDC, o también está la aproximación de red pública, red privada, en donde vamos a desarrollar una vez se toma la decisión. Pero en Latinoamérica nosotros estamos viendo todo desde la barrera un poco, o sea, nosotros no vemos que haya una decisión de hacia un lado hacia el otro. Creo que estamos expectantes a ver cómo se resuelve o cómo les va a Europa o cómo les va a Estados Unidos en la estrategia antes de tomar una decisión. En Colombia entendemos que el regulador ha participado de experimentos para poder crear un activo digital estable, pero no obstante, nosotros, al ser privados y al estar bajo un marco privado, lo que nosotros facilitamos a través de los stablecoins es precisamente ese settlement, que puedan pasar rápidamente entre dos tokens, como un USDC a un COPW 24/7, y que sea on-chain para facilitar el comercio y el manejo de capital de las personas de una forma segura, con unos riesgos manejados, identificando las contrapartes, que ese también viene un tema de lo que nos trae este tipo de activos, y es uno, pues de dónde son emitidos, cómo son emitidos, bajo qué regulación, cuál es el riesgo, porque acá también es muy importante tener presente el consumidor. Entonces, no es lo mismo un USDT a un USDC o a otro tipo de activo digital estable, porque tienen unos riesgos diferentes, composiciones diferentes. Entonces, creemos también que es importante que los consumidores entiendan muy bien qué tipo de activos son los que están comprando para intercambiar y hacer sus settlement. Creo
El stablecoin es la viabilidad por el entidad legal. Y el CBDC es la viabilidad en el Banco Central. Y ambos existen en el blockchain. Y ambos pueden existir en el blockchain. Y la diferencia es la viabilidad en los libros. Uno, stablecoin de una empresa o de un banco o de un fondo tal vez. Y el otro, el CBDC, es la viabilidad en el Banco Central específico. Ambos pueden existir y ambos existen en las redes de blockchain, pueden existir en varias redes de blockchain y pueden intercambiarlos entre los dos. Aún no hay CBDCs vivos en varios lugares, pero la interoperabilidad existe, posibilidad por eso. A un punto sobre eso, Ilan, en tu trabajo de blockchain, creo que tienes algunos slides que puedes mostrar más sobre los proyectos de blockchain y Bit.
Perdón, estaba en mute. Muchas gracias, Tristan. Sí, encantado. Voy a compartir tal vez esta iniciativa como para dar un poco de contexto del apoyo que estamos brindando desde el blockchain a los bancos centrales y a los reguladores. No está limitado a los bancos centrales, pero también, por ejemplo, superintendencias de servicios bancarios, superintendencias de valores pueden participar de esta iniciativa. La iniciativa se llama CB Web3 y básicamente es una iniciativa que está planteada para 24 meses, donde empezamos a inicio de año, primero con la conformación del ecosistema de los que estarían participando. Es una iniciativa en la que, como les comentaba, es coliderada con SEMLA y con FLAR, junto con BitLab. Y la expectativa es poder utilizar una red, que es la red de LACNet. LACNet es una organización, es una ONG que se crea dentro del marco de blockchain para poder brindar los servicios y darles la calidad de servicio que las organizaciones requieren. Entonces, se firma un contrato de servicio, se firma se cuenta con un sistema de SLA o de calidad del servicio, digamos, que respalda ese contrato. Y pues básicamente se puede contar entonces ahora sí con una red que además de ser pública, es permisionada y la ventaja de hacerlo permisionada es que le das una seguridad jurídica a la transacción, porque las transacciones son firmadas como tal y al poder ser firmadas con una identidad digital que conocemos, entonces tienen un concepto que es el no repudio. Estas transacciones no pueden ser repudiadas porque ya fueron previamente firmadas. Y otro concepto adicional que incluye esto es que son firmas que son resistentes a los ataques cuánticos. Esto le da un layer de seguridad a la red como tal y a las transacciones, porque cuando nosotros estamos pensando en transacciones acá, estamos pensando en el bono del tesoro del gobierno de Bolivia que tiene 25 años plazo o 40 años plazo, ¿verdad? Estamos pensando en el título de la propiedad de una persona que representa donde va a vivir pues toda su vida, ¿verdad? Entonces son transacciones que necesitamos asegurarnos que perduran en el tiempo de forma segura. Y este proyecto pues busca generar conocimiento, ese es el objetivo, generar conocimiento entre los participantes del sistema bancario. Van a haber bancos centrales, hay reguladores, algunos bancos comerciales, pero lo que principalmente busca es generar lo que nosotros llamamos una prueba de concepto. Es una prueba de concepto, es montar un escenario en el que de forma segura vamos a probar y vamos a demostrar cómo la tecnología funciona y aprender de ello. Entonces, es es estar en el asiento del copiloto del carro y experimentando cómo es que la tecnología funciona y qué beneficios esto nos da, ¿no? Y además de los beneficios, pues qué consideraciones tenemos que tomar en cuenta, ¿verdad? En privacidad, en seguridad, en anonimato, etcétera, etcétera. Son elementos que los bancos centrales nos van a alimentar. Entonces, se crean dos grupos de trabajo. Estos grupos de trabajo básicamente van a trabajar de la siguiente manera. Los bancos centrales forman un grupo de trabajo, bancos centrales y reguladores forman un grupo de trabajo en que se definen los requerimientos de lo que debería ser una solución para poderla testear en este ambiente de pruebas de concepto, ¿verdad? En un ambiente sandbox, un ambiente seguro. Y por el otro lado tenemos un grupo de trabajo técnico. Son proveedores de tecnología, son desarrolladores de software que básicamente tomamos los requerimientos que nos están dando los bancos centrales y construimos lo que se llama un bien público digital. Para probar, voy a cambiarme al siguiente slide, para probar estos casos de uso que planteamos. Este bien público digital es lo que nosotros llamamos código fuente abierto. Y para eso usamos un laboratorio de Linux Foundation que se llama también CVWeb3. Y en este laboratorio, pues estamos desarrollando entonces este bien público digital que se va a convertir en en el foundation las piedras, los pilares para que el día de mañana otros países, perfectamente Bolivia, puedan empezar a desarrollar su propia plataforma. ¿Tiene que empezar desde cero? No, ya tiene un bien público digital, ya tiene experiencia, ya puede tomar, ya tiene el conocimiento, ya puede tomar sus decisiones de si es algo que nos interesa, es algo que no nos interesa, si nos interesa, qué consideraciones tenemos que tomar en cuenta. Ya podemos empezar, inclusive ya tengo una serie de proveedores de tecnología que me pueden ayudar en ese proceso. Estos escenarios que planteábamos de pruebas de concepto son básicamente dos escenarios, uno en el ambiente doméstico y el otro en el ambiente internacional, en donde vamos a emitir un token, un título valor, y la emisión de estas CBDCs. Vamos a permitir que los bancos centrales, usando la infraestructura propia del proyecto, esto no representa un costo para los bancos centrales ni para los reguladores, más que el tiempo y la dedicación de poder participar en estas tareas de grupos de trabajo, pero que permita eso, permite esa experimentación a nivel doméstico y a nivel internacional, como les mencionaba. En grandes rasgos, este es el proyecto, ¿verdad? Que como les digo, tiene una duración de 24 meses. Ahorita justamente este mes de junio, SEMLA y FLAR están enviando las cartas de invitación a los bancos centrales. Y bueno, pues es una invitación también a aprovechar, una invitación abierta para que puedan invitar también a sus entidades financieras en Bolivia a ser parte de esta iniciativa. Tristan, te devuelvo la palabra. Gracias.
Gracias, gracias. Sobre eso, en ese proyecto, con esa iniciativa, el capacidad para realizar pagos internacionales o pagos diarios locales, ¿cómo funciona este sistema con pagos diarios?
Sí, en el caso de los pruebas de concepto que nosotros estamos planteando, es lo que llamamos el enfoque mayorista. Entonces, se emiten los tokens entre los bancos centrales, o de los bancos centrales se emiten los tokens, los CBDCs, y los pagos se hacen solo a nivel de bancos. No llega a ofrecerle una billetera digital al usuario final. ¿Ok? Y eso es un poco para... nosotros reconocemos que el tema de CBDCs en algunos escenarios genera controversia, en otros escenarios genera mucho valor. Nosotros nos enfocamos en la parte donde genera más valor, que consideramos es en la parte mayorista, automatizando los pagos y principalmente también facilitando pagos transfronterizos, ¿verdad? Porque ya entonces ya tenemos CBDCs que pueden hacer liquidación entre pares, entre un país y otro, no sé, pensemos entre Brasil y Bolivia, y como tenemos, a pesar de que son dos redes distintas, podemos habilitar un bridge, lo que llamamos un bridge de interoperabilidad, para que esos tokens tokens que fueron emitidos en distintas redes de distintos países puedan tener una liquidación entre ellas, ¿verdad? Y esto, nosotros vamos a estar emitiendo dentro del proyecto se emite una billetera que tiene su propia custodia de los propios assets, pero esta billetera es de uso exclusivo de bancos centrales y bancos comerciales, no cascadea al usuario final.
Excelentes puntos. Y sobre esto, I want to change the focus back to stablecoins a little bit. And it makes a lot of sense from the commercial implementation of payments on a high level. And it's exciting to see these macro developments happening through countries and through central banks to make payments through central banks more efficient. And as we mentioned earlier, today in Bolivia, the environment is focused on the use of stablecoins and the regulation that is needed to facilitate the payments with stablecoins. I want to turn back to Anthony and Sergio on stablecoins. Anthony, we were discussing, sorry for all of the Spanish, but we were discussing in the CBDC projects, one, what the inclusion and collaboration with central banks is in the institutional level, and then the most recent question was the use of those tokens for doing daily payments. Now, you're looking at creating a stablecoin directly from a government entity in the United States. That stablecoin, will people be able to use that stablecoin to do payments, to do daily payments?
Absolutely. And that's one of the reasons we're very excited about what the Wyoming stable token can accomplish. So the goal for us is not to only be used in the state of Wyoming. The goal for us is to launch a product that is usable in Wyoming, usable broadly within the United States, usable internationally for global remittances, and also potentially be used on decentralized finance platforms or DeFi, although that is certainly downstream of significant compliance work on our side. One of the things that our commission has done in its technical assessment of different blockchains is perform a blockchain selection exercise. As I mentioned before in my comments about the interoperability between perhaps stablecoins issued by private issuers on public infrastructure versus public entities, which are typically using private technology and infrastructure. One of the goal for us is, again, to leverage those public and permissionless blockchains and to optimize for the speed of payments, the low costs of public payments on blockchains. And we did a very lengthy and robust selection exercise for that, which I'm quickly advertising because it's something that our team is quite proud of, and it's publicly listed on our website. So should anyone want to take a look at the assessment that our agency has created, that is publicly available information. And you could take a look at all of these different metrics, about 25 different criteria that our commission thought was relevant to facilitating exactly the use case that Tristan is talking about, which is really scaling towards retail use at the end of the day. Now, we are a very small team with a very small budget. So perhaps, for the day one launch of Wyoming stable tokens, we're going to work with what we refer to as licensed service providers. These may be the large exchanges, payment platforms, digital wallets that already have large customer bases. They already, and very importantly for this conversation, have a regulatory or compliance structure in place, such as KYC and anti-money laundering controls, compliance with the Bank Secrecy Act and travel rule, which was talked about at the end of the last panel. So the goal is to partner with those types of institutions first, but eventually over the next 18 months, 2 years, work towards becoming a direct-to-consumer product. And we believe that'll help us scale globally, especially since our issuance will be done as a sovereign entity, because again, the state of Wyoming is the one putting the token out. So it'll be interesting to navigate the multiple compliance frameworks from a global perspective, which don't necessarily regulate the state of Wyoming, but we will certainly want to be available in multiple jurisdictions because we believe the net good comes from the transmissibility of a Wyoming stable token. And again, that ability to perform settlement anywhere on Earth in just a few seconds and with very little fees on top of it.
Thank you. I know we're getting into payments and there's a lot of interest in this. Our final panel today, just to make sure you all stay. Para que sabemos, el último panel hoy es enfocado en la custodia y pagos con criptoactivos. Este panel es más para entender como el ambiente de qué es los stablecoins, cuáles son los beneficios y la diferencia entre los stablecoins y los CBDCs. And I do want to have one more point, because I know that we're all interested in stablecoin payments. When I was working with the Wenia team, this question is for Sergio. COPW, the stablecoin of the peso colombiano, is a representation on blockchain del peso colombiano. Well, so can you tell a little bit of the payments environment and the interaction of that stablecoin with the local currency? Because obviously you can do payments with pesos colombianos and you can do payments with COPW, the stablecoin. Can you give us a little bit of insight between the differences?
Claro que sí, Tristan. Entonces, un poco, el stablecoin, como está diseñado en Wenia, es para que una persona compra o venda el stablecoin. No es un stablecoin en el sentido de que la persona entrega, se tokeniza y se le da el peso tokenizado, sino que Wenia previamente lo que hace es crear su token cuyo precio está referenciado en una reserva que es auditada y que le indica a las personas que tienen la liquidez necesaria para que el activo cueste 1 a 1 con el peso colombiano. Hoy el único que tiene poder liberatorio en Colombia es el peso emitido por el Banco Central, que hoy la única forma en que lo emite es en físico o sí, en moneda o, en metálico o en papel. Ese es el único activo que tiene poder liberatorio. En ese sentido, cuando una persona va a realizar un pago, no tiene que pactar nada diferente, sino el precio, y esto libera su obligación. Ahora bien, con el stablecoin del COPW, al ser un activo privado, pues es como cualquier otro instrumento que tiene la persona. Las personas pueden aceptar una dación en pago. En ese sentido, ¿qué es una dación en pago? Es, si bien la obligación se había pactado en pesos colombianos, la forma en la que voy a cumplir mi obligación, porque la persona que está vendiendo me lo permite, es a través de COPW. Esa persona tiene una billetera, yo le puedo enviar los COPW para cumplir con la obligación. Esa es la primera forma. O la otra forma es directamente, antes de acordar la operación, se acuerda que el activo con el que le vas a pagar no va a ser con un peso colombiano, sino con un stablecoin llamado COPW, la forma de cumplir y liberarte de la obligación. Vemos que este mecanismo facilita mucho y complementa, digamos, no sustituye, sino que lo que busca es complementar para personas que son muy nativas digitales y que prefieren que su capital sea manejado más fácil a través de activos digitales que son fácilmente intercambiables en la blockchain y que les permite tener también facilidad de exponerse a otro tipo de monedas. Por ejemplo, una compañía que quiera tener, o una persona natural que prefiera pasar muy rápidamente y que tenga mecanismos fáciles de pasar entre un activo expuesto al dólar, como es el USDC, con el COPW, lo puede hacer rápidamente 24/7, no debe esperar la autorización de alguien más, sino que la persona puede ordenar fácilmente ese intercambio, tener esa exposición, y si esa persona a su vez tiene que otra obligación en dólares, pues lo podría hacer rápidamente. Entonces vemos cómo los stablecoins, que finalmente es una solución privada para problemas de los privados, por decirlo de alguna forma inicialmente, agiliza el comercio, facilita las transacciones, y todo desde un ambiente muy seguro. En el caso de Wenia, nuevamente, pues es regulado su activo digital y cumpliendo los procesos de AML, porque las personas, al ser una billetera custodiada, deben revelar quiénes son, de dónde vienen, de sus ingresos y las contrapartes con las que van a tener interacción con este activo digital. Gracias, Tristan.
Gracias, Sergio. Entonces, en resumen, el stablecoin de COP es para resolver ese desafío de conectar el dólar digital de USDC, USDT, las monedas digitales, digamos, que están dolarizados o con pares de Ethereum o Bitcoin o otros, y integrarlos con el sistema financiero que en Bolivia existe, ¿cierto?
De acuerdo.
Excelente. I wanna ask another question for Anthony. If we can go into the regulatory part, focusing on regulation, because we understand now that central bank digital currency is the liability on the central bank, and a stablecoin is a liability on a company or an entity or a fund. In this case, what you're doing in Wyoming. In Bolivia, we're here to help develop a base for regulation of both, so that we create an open environment for innovation and an open environment to resolve the challenges that are here today. When you're looking at, in the United States, creating regulation for stablecoins in particular, I know that is your focus. What are some of the examples of important parts of policy? What are some important policies that regulators should think about when looking at stablecoins?
Thank you, Tristan. I think that the top concern will always come back to investor protection. One of the reasons why I think that the digital asset industry in the US is a little underdeveloped, especially from a regulatory perspective, is because we've had many false starts. If those who are following along remember the big crisis with FTX, that was an instance where many US politicians got involved with that firm, and then when it imploded, that led to a very strong retracement. But if you look at what happened in the aftermath of FTX and all the different branches that were solvent or not solvent, really the only branch that had the appropriate consumer protections in place was Japan. So FTX Japan remained solvent throughout the entire crisis. And the reason for that is because Japan itself had several years prior had similar issues with a crypto exchange called Mt. Gox, which is predominantly a Bitcoin exchange, which had a big hack. And then Japan did essentially a moratorium for a few years, came up with very stringent guidance, again, focused on investor protection, and then has been able to roll out framework since the Japan Financial Services Agency. And that's why when FTX, again, had its issues, Japan still had a solvent position there. So again, I would repeat that investor protections are always going to be the most important. If you look at the regulations that are being put forth in the US right now, particularly through the Stable Genius Acts pertaining to stablecoins, there's significant wording in there around investor protections. Of earlier version of the Stable Genius Act, which was put forth by Senator Cynthia Lummis from our state of Wyoming, but at the federal level, was called the Payment Stablecoin, the LGPSA, the Lummis-Gillibrand Payment Stablecoin Act, a bit of a mouthful there. But almost half of that document was about what would happen in the event of receivership. So again, how are investors going to be protected? The purchasers, the holders, the end users of stablecoins going to be protected in the case that an issuer has financial difficulties. So that is certainly the number one item on the docket when it comes to drafting this legislation as to what kind of needs to lead the charge. And then the second thing I would quickly add is there needs to be very specific guidance for which agency, which regulatory body will oversee stablecoin issuance or anything further about the functions of stablecoins. So if you're looking at what's happening in the US, former versions of stablecoin acts have been, focused on the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Commodities and Futures Trading Commission, Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. We don't need to list them all, but the point being there's been a lot of overlap and confusion about which agency is actually in charge of oversight. So I think creating clarity around that is the second most important piece of any successful legislation, whether it's around stablecoins or CBDCs or beyond.
Thank you so much. I want to repeat for the crowd here a point that was súper importante. Soy hablando Spanglish. Uno de los puntos muy grave en esto sobre el desarrollo de regulación aquí en Bolivia de criptoactivos es que el ejemplo que da es FTX. ¿Has escuchado de FTX? Era un exchange bastante grande de Estados Unidos. Y este exchange con $1.000 millones era al fin de día una estafa. ¿Por qué? Porque no era regulación sobre el liquidez de este exchange. Y el ejemplo que él da era que el único país que no era en bases perdimientos era en Japón, que en ese tiempo era regulación sobre el liquidez de los exchanges, por ejemplo. Entonces, es un excelente ejemplo en cómo tenemos que realmente ver esa responsabilidad de crear regulación sobre las instituciones que o crean criptomonedas o que facilitan el uso de criptomonedas. And in this, I just wanted to make sure that I'm a little bit clear in understanding and communicating it, because it's really important what all of you are doing and what we're doing, and we're here to help develop regulation. And not all countries have solid regulation for crypto or for digital assets. As an example, I'm going to come back to Sergio in Guinea, because I understand that Guinea is in Colombia, but it does not have a Colombia license for digital currency. So, Sergio, can you give a little bit of insight how that works?
Sí, claro, Tristan. Listo, perfecto. Ya me escuchas en eco. Ya. Claro, Guinea opera desde Bermudas. Guinea es una entidad licenciada en Bermudas con la licencia clase F. Eso es una licencia clase full. Para obtener la licencia clase F, Guinea debió probar ante el regulador que tiene la robustez en la gestión de sus riesgos. ¿Se está escuchando? No te escucho. ¿Ahí me escuchan? ¿No? ¿Sí?
Bien.
Listo, perfecto. Les comentaba que Guinea es una compañía que es incorporada en Bermudas, tiene una licencia clase F bajo el DABA, que es el marco regulatorio para toda compañía que quiera desarrollar negocios con activos digitales. Para obtener esta licencia, la compañía debe demostrar que tiene una robustez en la gestión de sus riesgos operativos, ciberseguridad, financieros, como ahorita lo hablaban del tema de liquidez, y además de eso, un marco fuerte en materia de administración de riesgos de lavado de activos y financiación al terrorismo. Ahora bien, Guinea vincula personas que están en Colombia, ciudadanos colombianos, a esta operación que está en Bermudas. ¿Por qué lo realiza? Porque en Colombia, nuevamente, la definición de activos digitales y el tipo de activos digitales que ofrece Guinea no son considerados activos financieros ni moneda fiduciaria. En este sentido, Guinea opera como un marketplace, si se quiere decir, como lo hace pero como lo hace Amazon, cuyos activos que ofrece la plataforma son activos digitales que un colombiano puede acceder porque tiene las rampas de entrada para poder cambiar, precisamente comprar con sus pesos, compra COP-W y procede a hacer el intercambio para activos digitales. Pero en Colombia actualmente hay un proyecto de ley, ya pasó el primer debate. Este proyecto de ley no busca que las compañías obtengan una licencia, sino un registro. un registro para que puedan cumplir con los controles de las entidades en materias de AML locales, consumidor locales, y además trae otras prerrogativas y otros temas, ya sea frente al gobierno como frente a estas instituciones para cumplir ciertos requisitos. Nosotros hoy debemos cumplir también, a pesar de que estamos desde Bermudas, porque vinculamos personas en Colombia, debemos cumplir también la regulación en todo lo que tiene que ver en el consumidor, en todo lo que tiene que ver con materia de AML. Si me estás hablando, no te escucho. Te veo que me hablas, pero no te escucho. Dime.
WhatsApp abierto o algo. Eso cortando. Tu WhatsApp cortando. Tu WhatsApp está abierto. ¿Es Messenger, tal vez?
No, no te escucho.
No sé cómo.
Escucho a las personas que están en el sonido, que están manejando el sonido, pero no te escucho a ti.
Hola.
Sergio, si me escuchas.
Sí, ya te escucho. Sí, perfecto. No, en ese sentido, lo que hace, bueno, como para finalizar, es ofrecer los servicios desde Bermudas bajo un ambiente regulado a los colombianos para que los colombianos tengan una opción regulada que tiene la obligación de mostrar los riesgos, tenemos que avisar de cuáles son los riesgos de interactuar con Juenia, que tiene que cumplir con un marco robusto en toda la materia de gestión de riesgos, que cumplimos también un marco regulatorio frente al consumidor. Entonces, de esta forma es que ofrecemos los servicios en Colombia.
Gracias. I want to turn back to Jonas from the regulatory perspective of the central bank digital currency, because there exists the possibility for Bolivia to go down this route of development for a CBDC. I want to ask you two questions. I'm going to start with regulation, and then I'm going to start with economics, because I know you have a PhD in economics. First, in regulation, is the central bank looking at creating a new entity for a central bank digital currency? For example, as we saw with stablecoins, often financial institutions will create a new entity that will have that license. Is it the same with the central bank digital currency, or is it different?
Okay, and I assume I start with responding to the first one, and then you ask the second one. Yeah. Okay, perfect. So the short answer, Tristan, is that the central bank is not creating a new entity. So the ECB is doing this itself. So because the ECB has the mandate to issue currency, right? Which means there is generally a mandate there, but of course the existing laws have to be adjusted to capture that. And what we can learn from Europe here is that this takes time. So to give you some context, there was a regulatory draft by the European Commission. It has been made in June 2023, so 2 years ago. And in Europe, the processes takes always a little bit longer. So there are 3 parties involved, also the Council and the Parliament, in getting regulation through. And we are still lacking feedback from the Council and the Parliament in Europe, which means this draft is now, let's say, lying on the table for 2 years, but still there needs to be feedback provided and then to be agreed. Okay, so this shows this really takes a lot of time. But we do see a lot of progress here, and actually there is at least the ECB expects or hope to get some more clarity on the regulatory side by end of the year or October, to be to be transparent. So this means there needs to be new laws, similar as it has been done with the MiCA regulation that we have heard today around before. This also needs to be in place for a digital euro, but this is in the making. And this is, of course, not being made in Europe by the ECB, right? The ECB is not the regulator, but by the European Council, Parliament, and the Commission, the three other parties that are basically responsible for regulation. And they, of course, match this with some ECB perspectives, but the ultimate lawmaker is not the European Central Bank in Europe, which I think is also quite interesting and quite different from some other jurisdictions.
Thank you. And my follow-up question is on the economic side. In Bolivia, the economy is a little bit different than Europe. A little bit. So thinking about the local economy and from your expertise, and I know you study this type of development all over the world. And I know you had a presentation that I didn't let you share. But here practically, when we're talking about a government or a currency, more specifically a currency that's in crisis, and we're looking at the potential of going down a route of a central bank CBDC, would making a CBDC make monetary policy more difficult or easier? Or how does the relationship of monetary policy and the creation of the CBDC work? And in particular, if you can try to think in the context of Bolivia and the situation that we're in right now.
Yeah. Thanks, Tristan. And of course, as an economist, the answer to this question is always, it depends, right? So what you always hear from economists. And of course, it's super difficult. And I did some research back in my PhD time on exactly this topic, and generally because there are a lot of facets to that. But let me elaborate on a few of them. First, I think not, endangering financial stability is currently, at least from my perspective, one of the key challenges, but also the key focus of the ECB with the digital euro. So as for every new form of money, there are a lot of benefits and there are a lot of potential challenges, right? And the ECB is very clear that it does not want to disrupt and endanger financial stability. And here, for example, what the ECB is actually setting in place, if the law is also going into this direction, which I think it will create a maximum account limit on digital euro holdings. So this means that in times of crisis, it's not possible that, for example, if you have a financial crisis and you don't trust your bank anymore for whatever reason, that people can take all their money from the bank account and put this into CBDC, because this would disrupt banking, right? So refinancing would be gone, liquidity costs would be higher, and this is not what a central bank wants. That in Europe also has the mandate to maintain financial stability, right? So this limit is pretty important in the architecture to not endanger financial stability. That's like the first aspect of that. The second one is, of course, that if you have a central bank digital currency that is used massively, and today we don't know yet what the usage will be, right? Because we don't even know how exactly it will look like, or if it actually comes, right? So it's very, very challenging to answer. But if it would be a kind of predominant form of money for a central bank, of course, it would be kind of on the first hand side easier to conduct monetary policy, because you do see more data, right? We know cash is not, is not digital. So this means it's hard to do, monetary policy decisions based on something that is physical and not digital. So here it's basically easier, but the other hand side, of course, Tristan, is it again depends on how do you if it's primarily used as a substitute for cash or for bank deposits. Because if it's for cash, it's very simple for a central bank, right? In a balance sheet, it's just a switch. But if it kind of also, crowds out bank deposits in some dimension, then this has implications for monetary policy. So it's not that simple to put it in short, but there are a lot of design features used also in Europe that at least tries to minimize this risk.
Thank you for that clarification. I heard yes and no, of course, from an economist, but I appreciate the insight. It sounds like it can be good for stability in monetary policy, because you have a distinction between a private bank liability and a central bank liability. And so in times of economic crisis, you could perhaps go back to your central bank and use that as a counterpart. So I could see that potential benefit. I could also see the potential challenge there because you have to go back to your central bank. And in times of crisis, that can be challenging to do. So I appreciate your insight there. It looks like we're already over time, but I do want to ask one more question of all of the panelists. I want to put CBDC and stablecoin against each other for a second. Right? We're here in Bolivia, and I know we spoke with each of you a little bit about the context here of the economy. And I want to get your insight. You can choose to take an easy answer, you can choose to take a bold answer. But CBDC versus stablecoin. Here, we've already gone down the route of using stablecoins to supplement payments and to supplement access to liquidity. If you were to make a suggestion or see a route that can be used in the future, I want you to give your insight from your expertise. Jonas, you're on the screen. I want to start with you.
Yes, so from a European context, to be honest, I think it's completely different. So the digital euro will not be based on a blockchain. It will not be for international use, right? And it will be issued by a central bank. It will basically be similar as a digital form of cash, right? So if we talk about programmability in these futures, cross-border payment, again, from a European perspective, it's not the focus, right? And this is, I think, where stablecoins are super, super strong in. But if it's about creating independence from other countries, which is currently a European, focus and effort, where you want to also, be responsible for the payment system and kind of also write the rules, then a CBDC makes kind of more sense from my perspective. So here again, it's again an it depends answer, but I think that this comparison lacks because very often it's not as simple as most people think. So to be honest, I think in a prospering economy, a growing economy, there is place for both. And I hope also to see such a world emerge where we will see both forms of money available.
Thank you, Jonas. Let's go to Anthony, please.
Thank you, Tristan. My take is that while we can set up all these regulations, we can look at all the economics, we can do a great amount of work and really angle a CBDC or stablecoins to be used at a retail level, globally speaking. I think that real mainstream adoption will not happen until the appropriate privacy controls are put in place so that users of stablecoins or CBDCs can be confident in transacting with those tokens without the concern that they will be unfairly or unilaterally interdicted by a private issuer or a government that may be antithetical to their beliefs, background, what have you. I know that there's already some concerns with CBDCs we've seen issued around the world where they're tied to things like a social credit score. With Wyoming, we are looking very strongly at both policy that will protect privacy, and Wyoming does care significantly about privacy. And I'll also add that from a technical perspective, we are looking at zero-knowledge proofs and homomorphic encryption, which are fancy terms to mean privacy-preserving technology that will help give that confidence to the end user that they are transacting confidently and comfortably, that action cannot be taken against them unilaterally, but still give the issuers enough visibility into those transactions to make sure that their stablecoins or their CBDCs are not being used by nefarious actors.
Thank you, Anthony. Sergio.
Sí, como buen abogado, mi respuesta también es depende. Creo que el CBDC resuelve ciertos temas importantes en el wholesale. En el retail tiene el problema de seguridad que ahorita nos hablaba Anthony, y cómo garantizamos que las personas mantengan su privacidad y cómo gasta o cómo el Estado no lo puede privar de su capital en el caso tal de que caiga en manos de algo autoritario. Es como el miedo, y hay que entender un poco también la filosofía de dónde vienen los activos digitales, que es entregar el poder a la gente para que la gente pueda decidir sobre su capital, siempre y cuando la decisión sea legítima o no vaya contraria a la norma, caso en el cual sí podría venir a actuar el Estado. Por otro lado está el stablecoin. Para mí el stablecoin es la mejor solución frente a los privados porque, como por ejemplo lo ven en Estados Unidos el Genius Act, como medio de pago garantiza la estabilidad financiera, requiere tener unos requisitos mínimos para poder emitir y circular dentro de ambientes regulados y permite mantener esa privacidad y el poder de las personas de decidir cómo utilizar su capital y sus activos.
Gracias, Sergio. Y último, Ilan, por favor.
Gracias, Tristán. Yo creo que la tecnología, bueno, en general nos ofrece varias oportunidades y creo que lo que tenemos que enfocarnos es en identificar en dónde están esas oportunidades que podemos aportar para nuestros conciudadanos. En este escenario me parece que hay funcionalidades donde stablecoins, digamos, es una plataforma muy útil, así como otras versiones de cryptocurrencies, ¿verdad? Y CBDCs es otra, ¿verdad? Yo creo que debemos de entender que así como hemos venido trabajando con dinero, en algún momento dinero metálico, después pasamos a la emisión de papel, moneda, después pasamos a dinero un poco más electrónico o plástico, y ese dinero, esa representación de dinero de valor ha ido evolucionando. Creo que ahora estamos también en otra etapa de esa evolución del dinero donde lo estamos viendo más tangiblemente. Entonces creo que tanto CBDCs como stablecoins, como inclusive criptos, van a coexistir y y lo que tenemos que entender es cómo nosotros permitimos que esa coexistencia, digamos, le permita a nuestra economía sacar el mayor provecho, básicamente, ¿no?
Excelente, excelente, de acuerdo, 100%. Yo siempre recomiendo que integramos todos los ambientes posibles y
So we do have an interesting question from the audience. What would be the importance of on-chain identity? Oh, we don't have time. Okay. All right. Then we're gonna just ask this question because it's really important to have it on the next panel.
I'm hearing for timing, we should be leaving now to lunch. We will have more time in the afternoon. Tendremos más tiempo después del almuerzo para tomar más preguntas abiertos. Discutimos más sobre los detalles de cumplimiento, regulación, las licencias de proveedores de servicios de cripto aquí en Bolivia, mundialmente, y al fin pagos diarios con aplicativos nuestros. ¿Logística para el almuerzo?
Y como les decía Tristan, en la tarde tenemos todavía 3 paneles que me parece son los más importantes y relevantes para muchos de los actores que estamos acá reunidos. Vamos a hablar sobre quiénes son los PSABs, quiénes debieran ser, cómo se los debería identificar, quiénes deberían actuar como tales. También vamos a estar conversando sobre normativas de cumplimiento y regulación, puntualmente para estos que se definan como PSABs. Cómo manejar temas de compliance, KYC, AML. Y finalmente, en el último panel del día, vamos a cubrir todo lo que es custodia, transacciones, pagos, on and off, on-ramp, off-ramp, y cuáles serían las mejores prácticas que podríamos adoptar como sector privado y público en Bolivia. A continuación, los invitamos a que puedan pasar al almuerzo. Vamos a tener las instrucciones específicas de parte de nuestra maestra de ceremonia. Sin embargo, quiero pedirles, por favor, que al momento de salir del salón puedan, todos aquellos que están utilizando los audífonos de traducción, acercarse hacia las mesas de registro para poder dejarlos en ese lugar y cuando retornemos por la tarde se van a volver a distribuir. También les pido que puedan pasar por la mesa de registro para recoger los tickets del almuerzo en el restaurante del Parlamento. En este punto de registro les van a indicar cómo tenemos que cruzar por el edificio para llegar hasta este lugar.
Before we finish, I just want to close with a thank you to our panelists. Thank you everyone for joining online. This was very insightful.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the invitation. Gracias a todos.
Adiós, que estén muy bien.
Vamos a pedir a todos los asistentes que se mantengan juntos al momento de la salida, ya que, como conocerán, la Plaza Murillo se encuentra cerrada, entonces habilitamos una ruta para salir del edificio y al mismo tiempo para poder ingresar. El personal de protocolo se encuentra en la parte de afuera, quienes nos guiarán por las salidas. Muchas gracias.
El medio digital que te informa, blockchain y criptos a toda hora. Desarrollamos comunidad, información y libertad. Blockchain aprende y avanza. En Bolivia el cambio nos reta. Del oriente al occidente, blockchain crece desde el 2020. Nuevo mundo al alcance, te informamos en cada avance, educamos sin fronteras, unidos hacia nuevas eras. Blockchain aprende y avanza, en Bolivia el cambio nos reta, somos red, comunidad, blockchain hacia la libertad. El medio digital que te informa, blockchain y criptos. Ahora desarrollamos comunidad, información. Blockchain vende y avanza. En Bolivia nos reta, somos red, comunidad. Un nuevo mundo al alcance, te informamos en